Looks like we're live with BowTiedTrance, aka Dr. Hypnosis. I'm Joshua Lisec on the special episode of Daily Persuasion. You know a bit about me already from watching this channel, and now you get to meet our anonymous friend, our second guest on Daily Persuasion. We're going to talk all things hypnosis, subconscious persuasion, manipulation techniques, both those that ought not be used, and talking about the ethics of when they can. We've got some questions already posted by audience members ready to rock and roll here. So I would like to very briefly allow Dr. Hypnosis here, who's a recurring feature being mentioned on Scott Adams' show, Coffee with Scott Adams. That's how I met BowTiedTrance initially, was in the replies on various Scott Adams tweets. Dr. Hypnosis, how are you today?
I am awesome, Joshua. Thank you so much for having me on, and go Midwest Power.
That's right. That's right. He's also in the Midwest. And I'd like to start off with your BowTiedTrance after the Bowtied Bowl sort of space that, the Bowtied jungle. Dr. Hypnosis is what you're called. So what is your background in professional hypnosis or in this profession? You've got a new book out, of course, called This Feels Like Cheating, and it's about hypnotic persuasion. So tell us a little bit about your background in hypnosis.
So I should probably start by very clearly, for legal purposes, saying I am not a doctor. There's a reason why I put the scare quotes around doctor in hypnosis, and I believe on my X profile I've changed that to doc, or if I haven't, I intend to. That was just something that one of our mutual friends, Maverick Alexander, started referring to me as
Yes.
Dr. Hypnosis, and I kind of liked the way that sounded. So as far as the background goes, you and I were just talking today a little bit back and forth on X about the overlap between hypnosis and religion. And that is actually where my foundation started about 15 years ago. I do have a whole chapter in this book called Holy Hypnosis about some of those overlaps. I was involved in a very large church at that time that was what we might call a faith healer church. They believed that the power of the Holy Spirit was still very much active in our time, and that we should be using it to pray for healings and to speak words of prophecy over people. And since I was already a little bit into reading about hypnosis at that time, it occurred to me very quickly that there was a lot of overlap in what we were doing and going out into the streets of the city, addressing strangers on the street to tell them, God told me a few moments ago that I would meet somebody here wearing a pink shirt, and you've got a pink shirt, and do you happen to have any pain in your back? Because that's also what I was sent here to look for. And inevitably that, yeah, I do have some pain in my back, and then we would, pray over them and see that they were feeling better. Or I would be talking to them. There's a lot of overlap here with what you might call a cold read, like some psychics will do it. I would tell this person things about their life that they would say, how could you possibly know that? Like, I feel like you've always wanted to be a video game designer. So how could you possibly know that? And then we would give them words of encouragement, like, well, God's telling us these things about you, and that the reason why I'm telling you this is because He intends to really bring you into that level of fulfillment in your life. So in either case, whether it was these words of wisdom or physical healings, the person or persons that we would interact with would leave the encounter feeling so much better about everything in their world. And so that was kind of like I said, I was reading about hypnosis at the time. I saw a lot of overlap in the way these things worked. And so that's how I kind of got my start.
And that particular faith healing type of community, I was a member of one very similar to that for a number of years called the Vineyard.
Oh, yeah.
That's also familiar or affiliated with this church out of California called Bethel. And the gentleman named Bill Johnson was the pastor of that church. And that sort of like, let's pray about it and then go out into the community and see what we see. I did that quite a bit from about 2009 to 2012, 13-ish, somewhere in there. And I was ordained as a minister through one of those communities. I have an interesting background in the evangelical sphere that's very similar to yours. We've had a number of private conversations about our various experiences and the realization that hypnosis techniques are worked into effective religious traditions and perhaps
Mm.
always have been.
one could say in any of those sort of group settings. I've often compared, not to be crass or trite about religion. I wouldn't want to offend anyone that way. But I've often said I was an Amway distributor for a couple of years and saw a lot of similarities in sort of you need to come to our weekly meetings and you need to come to the big conferences and you need to have like a regular repetition of this stuff and the very power of positive thinking mentality that goes with that sort of thing. It seems to be very common not only in sales and things like Amway, but also, you need to go to church every week to be sort of revitalized and re-energized and remember why we're doing this, and then go out in the street. So yeah, I see there's a lot of overlap. By the way, I have many Bill Johnson books from back in those days. So
What if I told you that I also grew up in Amway?
I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised at all.
Yes, that was my first exposure actually to the personal development self-help industry. We learned a number of things about characters like Tony Robbins,
Mm,
Robert Kiyosaki, the sort of really popular 1990s and 1980s, let's say like motivational seminar world, because the the commercial success of that particular industry, of the raw motivation guy up on stage with a microphone to his ear and getting people to do all kinds of dorky stuff, very, very goofy. That was, in fact, an example of stage hypnosis by another name.
mm,
And of
yeah.
course, learning about how it all works and then seeing that sort of motivational seminar, which is again a stage hypnosis set of techniques to put on
Mhm.
this show to entrance everyone and entrain everyone and then move the community, move the audience, then seeing that done in these evangelical spaces, these Pentecostal spaces. It's a motivational seminar, but it's like marketing Jesus. And then
Yeah.
when you learn what the techniques are, it, as I said today on social media, you can't really see religion the same way again, or even faith the same way again, when you see how the machinery of the mind works, how you can motivate, how you can mass persuade, or even manipulate. You know, Doc, I've ghostwritten a number of books for people who are in this space, including televangelists and TV preachers. And people would come up at various conferences or workshops or even church services, and after the preacher had shared that Joshua here helped with this book, and people would come up to me and say, "Oh, the Holy Ghost was really moving through you, brother, as you were writing that." And at the time, I identified as an atheist.
Awesome.
Yes, yes, I have a
Yeah,
very
there's
interesting faith journey we've spoken about before. If there's
yes,
anything else,
yes.
Doc, that you'd like to get to from this strange little Christian
Yeah.
rabbit hole, please unpack it now.
What a crazy way to start. Yes. And one of the things that really kind of cemented all of that is in my travels and studies and reading the books, all the books I can get my hands on. I watched a lot of Darren Brown's specials, not only his stage shows. Famous hypnotist, comes out of the UK. He got big enough to be doing Netflix shows, but he also did a lot of, like, before that, he was doing shows on the BBC, these little half-hour programs. And he did one episode where he posed as a faith healer and infiltrated a church area and was still getting the same results, of people saying they were healed and how did you know that about me and how is God speaking through you? So it just kind of connected everything. And like I said, I don't want to go too far down that path lest people think that I'm saying there is no such thing as God or that the power of the Holy Spirit isn't real. I don't really, as a hypnotist in public now, I don't kind of take a position on that because I want to help as many people as possible and not put up any of those barriers. But it is worth pointing out, as we said, a lot of the human brain is the human brain is the human brain, and the techniques to get it to do what it needs to do are the same, whether it's Amway, church, even what we see on how the media manipulates our thoughts and opinions, the way social media works. So yeah, we could springboard into a dozen different areas just based on that.
Yeah, and there's probably even some questions actually we've already received coming in here for today that are going to speak directly to this. One of them, of course, is a fellow named at Paul Bullard asking about self-hypnosis. What is self-hypnosis? How do you do it? Why would you do it? Does it work? Etc. You want to take a stab at that one?
Sure, and I know you've done videos on this too. I still remember one that you did maybe a year or two ago. I sort of never forgot it. You are very good at creating sticky content in that way. That you talked about when you write, and obviously I'm a writer too. I have been for many, many years in different areas. We won't tell the general public, but I sent you a book that I wrote about theology privately. So you talked about staring at a space on the wall and letting yourself get into that flow state before you start to write. And it is an area in neuroscience, we call this the alpha theta or theta state of the brain. I liken it to a daydream, just to sort of demystify the whole concept of hypnosis and trance and woo, it's a daydream, really, is all it is. And anybody can do that, and we do it all the time. We're just talking now about doing it intentionally and saying, I'm about to go do something, writing, or, whatever it is. I want to come up with some good creative solutions to a problem that I have. Well, then just slip yourself into a little daydream and begin to visualize and imagine in detail the scenes that you want to see yourself accomplishing the task that you've set out to do. Um, if I sit down to write, I did this frequently while I was writing this book. It would seem like such a hard thing. Like, oh, I've got to open up the Word document and start on another chapter. Here we go. And I would do that little daydream thing for about 15 minutes and visualize having written the best chapter I've ever written in my entire life and the good feeling that comes with that. And then I would come out of that daydream and start to write. And every time I'd feel like that was the best chapter I ever wrote.
Yeah, so and that makes me think of is that some of my absolute best work that I've ever produced objectively, even in terms of commercial success, actually yes, in terms of commercial success, the most copies sold of books, either ghostwritten or edited, which is ghostwriting by another name, generally speaking, when you're sort of riffing on what the author's original ideal is, and then you're expanding and you're deepening, you're taking it off in another direction, and also authoring and co-authoring my own books. My best work occurs between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. when I am the least likely to self-edit, and I'm most likely to sort of get lost in the material because I'm so tired. But there's no sort of conscious filter there of, oh, what should I say here? What should I not say? But I'm so tired, I can't think, I can't get in my own way. You think between 1 and 4 a.m. and
Mm.
that
hmm
period. And that's when it just easily flows. And I naturally go into sort of like, I'm about to fall asleep sort of trance, but I
mm
don't fall asleep because I'm sitting at my computer or desk or whatever, standing desk and working. And it's an easy way to get into that trance-like state, just in the same way of like thinking about something deeply and then going and immediately working on the thing while you're sort of locked in the zone there, and you just sort of go and you do the thing. The real authentic you comes out, and it's in that space, in that sort of trance space, where a lot of religious rituals like to play, or particular words being repeated over and over, like the Catholic Mass or the Orthodox liturgy, or and some people know that I will often talk about the Latter-day Saints Church and some of their sacrament meeting practices. That also fits, I think, a description of a sort of ritualized, multi-sensory, persuasive trance inducement and entrainment of all of the people into it. Generally speaking, if you're really good at persuasion, they will call whatever you're doing a cult, right? And that's religious, that's political, that's everything. That's everything that where there's mass persuaders at work, they're going to be called a cult sooner or later.
Hmm. I always like to point out to people that in the Catholic faith, if you ever look into the Catholic Catechism, they talk about the three C's that are the foundation of the religion, and that's creed, code, and cult. And that comes from the Latin cultus, which simply means the assembled worshiping body that comes together. And I think that's interesting that the acts that you're talking about, people coming together in a group to sing the same lyrics, to recite the same prayers
Yes.
together in group, uh, similar to chanting, if you will. That is what in the Latin is referred to as the cultus. And so the word cult in and of itself, yes, it has a bad rap and for good reason today, but at its base, it just refers to what we're talking about. It's just a, group activity together.
Exactly. Yes. Now, speaking of hypnosis, Doc, we've got a question from at Redbeard Keith. That's Brian Keith. He says, "How do we make ourselves hypnosis proof?" That's an
Mm,
interesting one. If there
mm,
are indeed good people who use hypnosis, and if one seeks out a practitioner, I'm certified through the National Guild of Hypnotists. You have your work. Mutual of ours named Jason Andrews. He's the based hypnotist on Twitter. There are a number of people who are good at what they do, and you go to them for specific problems in your life or frustrations that you have, breakthroughs you're seeking but haven't found a way. In any area of your life, a hypnotist can help. Whether it's my marriage is falling apart. How do I fix it? To my health is falling apart. How do I lose 25 pounds and 10 inches from my waist or something like that? Or
mm.
more, even. What about those who are manipulators? Those who maybe are multi level marketing schemers and are trying to make us commit to something that's not in our best interest. It's in their best interest for us to do it. Or prosperity
Yeah.
gospel preachers who get you to believe that if you just write that large check and give away your entire savings, you'll be blessed with more than you could ever possibly imagine.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's also an example of applied hypnosis. Doc, how do we protect ourselves?
Oh boy, this is a big answer to it. I remember that there was that church that I went to years ago, the Faith Healing Church. There was some of that, sort of thing going around. They were building a new church out on the West Coast, and they were looking for people to basically drop everything and move out and help establish that church. But some of the techniques that the pastor was using to whip up the emotional, frenzy to go and do that was, I thought, oh, well, you're using hypnosis to get people to, quit their jobs and drop out of school and go out and help you build your West Coast church. In some senses, Joshua, there is no way to hypnosis proof yourself. And I'm speaking here of something that I read in Robert Cialdini's great book, Influence. Cialdini, Scott Adams talks about him as being sort of the Godzilla, the godfather of persuasion. He talks about, in that case, it was the principle of reciprocity. If somebody does something nice for you, you are automatically, your brain wants to do it back for them. You're much more likely to comply with their next request and return the favor. And he talks about the fact that it's happened to him even though he wrote the book on it, even though he knows the technique. And he says some of these techniques, it's so deeply ingrained in our brain, that auto response, that you can't help it. I mean, I guess you could say, okay, I know you're doing reciprocity on me right now, and so therefore I refuse to comply with your request, but you're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel like a jerk for, not doing the next thing. So in that sense, some of these things are, you can't avoid it, even if you know the techniques. But I suspect that our friend on X asking the question is more asking about how do you dodge social media manipulation or media manipulation in general, not falling for the latest whatever it might be, COVID psyop or something like that. Hopefully I can say that. We're going on YouTube, I think. Um, the answer to that is to read a book like mine, or read another book on hypnosis and understand how the techniques work and why they work. And I have some products out on Gumroad that I can link to on X. I'm going through the book and recording some one-off lessons that I'm calling the cheating sessions. I just finished recording session 2, which takes you under the hood of what happens in the human brain during persuasion, during hypnosis, and how it all starts in our mammalian brain, which operates, it's driven and fueled by emotion and by feeling. And so much of our society, you've probably seen this, is kind of hardwired to think that no, we're logical, we're rational first, and I can take emotion out of my decision-making process. And in this book, I quote a lot of studies that show it's just not the case. We always start with the mammalian brain. We always start with the impulse, the feeling, and then kind of go from there to the rationalization step. If you want to be hypnosis proof, so to speak, manipulation proof, it starts with sacrificing your ego and saying, you know what, I am an irrational creature by default. I have access to logic, but I don't use it as often as I think I do. And once you understand that you do have that sort of back door in the basement of your brain, it's much easier to lock that door than it is if you say, deny that that door exists, like so many people do.
Interesting. Yes, there's this expression I heard that you are either persuading or being persuaded, and there's
Mm.
not any other role to play. There's not really such thing as an audience or a third-party observer. Uh, and if you think you can be that, then guess what? You're the one who's being persuaded here in this scenario. And so I think the word that we want to look for is like consent, for example. So
Mm.
if we're participating in a religion, then the best thing to do is to have a conscious awareness that you are consenting to being persuaded by showing up here and participating in this. Is that what you want? Versus, oh, let's kind of see what it's like. But a lot of people, I think, who encounter an emotion-driven religion will say things like, oh, I really felt the spirit move, or I really felt God's presence there. No, that was somebody who knew what they were doing with these techniques, which feels kind of sleazy to me because they know what they're doing. They're Tony Robbinsing their people for Jesus.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
don't know any better. They're basically hobbits, intellectually speaking. And the truth comes out behind closed doors when you're working with these people as speech writing and ghostwriting clients, and it's like if we have the prayer at this point, we will have maximum emotional impact. But if we have it too soon in the set of songs at the end of praise and worship songs, then it won't be as effective, and therefore we won't get as many donations. And then it's like,
Mm.
oh, so this is about the cash money. Oh, okay. You can get really turned off to organized religion really quick. That
Yeah.
said, just because something is corruptible doesn't mean that it's incorrect, which is sort of the place that I've come to in my own life. But I think the
I
key
like.
word is consent. If you're opening up
Yeah.
your X feed and you're just scrolling, doom scrolling, then realize that you are consenting to being hypnotized by this repetitive movement of the screen and the staring and all the stimuli is coming in. Is that what you want? Do you want to be hypnotized by whatever you happen to see, by whatever the algorithm shows up? Is that what you want, Doc?
That's not what I want. I love that you're drawing the distinction of the consent word is so important there because so many of these terms that we're using, we automatically attach bad meaning to them, like irrational. We automatically say, well, that means crazy. That means wrong. No, no, it doesn't. Not at all. I always say, like, love is one of the most irrational things in the world. Who would ever say that love is bad or wrong? So that they don't automatically equate. And the term manipulation that we're using automatically seems like it's a bad thing. But what do you think is happening when I go into a self-hypnotic trance because I know I need to work out today, but I just don't feel like it. So I'm going to go into that little daydream space and imagine myself running the 3 miles I need to run and feeling great about it. What am I doing? I'm manipulating myself to go do something that I don't really want to do right now. And any other context, if I said, I'm going to manipulate you to do something you don't want to do, you'd say, oh, that's bad. I said, no, but in this case, it's good. I do need to manipulate myself to want to go do a good thing that I don't want to do, but I'm going to like the effects.
Exactly. Yes. What I'm now thinking about is a book by another one of my clients called yes, this one right here. This one, Become Immune to Manipulation by Noah Ravoy. These are conscious persuasion techniques. These are manipulations, what he would call them, but they're consciously done, and he points out how they can be woven into negotiations or conversations in a business, personal, romantic context. Like for one of them, for example, is, honey, I know you're traveling. I'm too tired to talk on the phone tonight and kind of catch up after the days. I need to hit to bed early. Oh, okay. Well, we don't have to talk this week. We don't have to talk at all. We don't have to talk until I come back. In fact, I can make my trip last longer. I shouldn't have to feel like I'm butting into your life to get you to want to talk to me. What did I just do there? Besides mimic what 98% of women do to their men.
Right.
Instead of adding value, I'm attempting to extract value. I want your time and attention. You're not giving it. Therefore, you're bad, and I need to make you feel bad to give me what I want. It's a zero-sum game, not a value-add type of relationship. And that is the sort of default that I believe the vast majority of people have in interpersonal relationships is, in order to get what I want, I have to trick you.
Yeah.
And what Noah does is call out those tricks, but they're the ones that are a bit obvious like that. But there are others that are more subtle, and that are subconscious manipulation techniques. The sort of applied hypnosis to get you to feel like, wow, the spirit's really moving. If it's the parable of the talents time, so if I write a check for $1,000, I'll get $10,000 in value upcoming this week, let's say, and I fall for that. What are some subconscious persuasion and even manipulation techniques that are used that people should be aware of?
Yeah, there's another great book by Cialdini that he wrote after Influence. In fact, he wrote it right around the 2016 election, I think is when it came out. It's called Persuasion, where he talks all about setting the environment to persuade. And I on my locals site for subscribers, I do a little 10 to 15-minute podcast called Pocket Persuasion, where I just burn off these little mini lessons, take one topic and kind of run with it. And one of the ones that I did was called Soundtracking Your Life. And it was this fun little trick that I did this spontaneously with my wife one day. She was getting ready to go on a trip, and she was very had a lot of anxiety, running around the house. Oh, I can pack this. Oh, I forgot about this. I could just see like the tension building, building, building. Well, she loves the old James Bond films, and we like to watch those together. And so while she's bustling around the house and forget about this and forget about that, I said, hold on just a second. Keep going, doing what you're doing, but in your head, do the da 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 da, like have the theme to James Bond running in the back of your mind while you do it. And so she starts laughing and starts going about doing the work, but now she's got the 007, exciting theme music in her head, and now it feels like she's on a mission, accomplishing things, like a secret agent. That is what I would call a very subconscious switch. That's not. I mean, obviously, I was using words in that instance. But in the future, now she can pull off this little trick subconsciously to have a theme song running or something like that. That's an example of. Um, let me extend that just slightly. If she is coming home from work, I know it's been a stressful day. I can do something like have the stereo already playing some music that I know relaxes her or makes her feel good or that she associates with a positive memory. And it's playing in the background, but your subconscious will pick this up. I'm not using any direct words or hypnotic induction to do anything. It's just that when she comes into the house, that music is playing, and suddenly she goes, "Why do I feel, like I'm de-stressing immediately as soon as I come in?" So I'm not sure if that is an example of what you were talking about, but that's what I think of when I think of subconscious. I think of environment and the way that we dress for a job interview or the music that's playing in the car and the way those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that's an example of like a positive one of that sort of manipulation of self or other, where you sort of pre-swayed to feel the way that you want to feel. In terms of
Hmm.
music and sounds, I'm thinking how in a number of evangelical spaces that really do the sort of the Jesus marketing, when they want people to feel tense or at least feel some tension, some internal tension, there will be after a message, sermon, homily, or otherwise that is intended to make people feel guilty, and they'll really lay on what this verse says and what this verse says and what this verse says, what this verse says, which means that you're a bad, terrible, horrible, sinful person, something like that. They might then have a music that's in a minor key to sort of give the soundtrack for that tension. And then there's an opportunity for an altar call or something like this in an evangelical space, or the collection basket is offered, or something like this, call for prayer, whatever. And the release and the relief is offered with the call to action. In what key it goes from a minor key to a major key to sort of ease over the tension simultaneous with the call to action that's issued, to sort of set the mood of, I'm ready to release the tension, I'm ready to go from minor into a major. And this is all happening, and people have no idea that this is all by design, that it's a system, that it's templated and it's used across America and even the world in evangelical churches, and that people just think the Spirit's really moving tonight. Yeah, and a lot of cash is moving out of pocketbooks and bank accounts tonight, and it's all by design. That's an example of subconscious manipulation because multiple things are happening. They're sort of stacked together or in a certain order that
Yeah.
results in people feeling a certain way. Now, I do this with my books for effect. I like to say that the nonfiction book is a long form self hypnosis script. And it just so happens that people are paying for it. So the fact that you've paid for this, remember that commitment and consistency principle that you like to talk about, Doc, where you've bought it. Okay, so I've already invested in this. The cover looks great. The person's not like to know what they're talking about. It came well recommended. So social proof. All of these things are working prior to reading a word of the book. I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. And then when I open it up and I start reading, and the author says things like, have you ever felt this way? Or have you ever noticed? Or do you feel like? And I go, yes, 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 which is the rule of three being used. Wow, this person groks me. They get me totally. And then you begin to read, wow, that solution makes sense. I guess I should get on the author's email list. I guess I should use the coupon for 15% off the first order. And all of this is unfolded by design, and the reader becomes a recurring revenue customer or subscriber for my client, all by design. Whereas, of course, it benefits the client and also benefits the person because I tend to be picky and choosy who I ghostwrite for. I don't do ethics-free situations anymore. Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll leave it to the audience to figure out which ones were and which ones weren't ethical. That's another little sales
Yeah,
technique there.
that's a good question. That's not,
You're
that's
gonna
not one
have
of the
to.
Q&A though.
You're gonna have to buy all of his books to figure it out. Boom, sales flowing now. Another example of a very subconscious manipulation technique. I talked about this before on X. Is the way that the media will use the headline and the photo that goes with it, especially. And so you'll notice that when they're trying to make a fool out of President Trump, for example, they will always choose a photo of him making kind of an odd face, like a weird expression that makes him look a little dopey. That is an example of how you can subconsciously move and reframe the brain for the person who's about to read it so that they go into that article expecting to see, silliness in there. You can even look at the cover of my book sitting here. I've mentioned that Scott Adams' book, Reframe Your Brain, was one of the inspirations for finally writing this book that I did, as was your book on humans, both working together. Okay, it's time for me to get off the couch and finally put some words to page. But if you look at the design of this, it is somewhat similar to Scott Adams' Reframe Your Brain. The simple white, with a brain image on it. And somebody asked me, like, was that on purpose? And I said, no, it was entirely subconscious. I just saw the image in my head, but now looking back, I'm like, of course it was. Of course that was semi-intentional, but it was a very subconscious thing because that's the book I had just been reading.
There you go. Yes, yes. Um, there's a question that came in that I'm now thinking of since you brought up the news. I have a little series I've been doing for a few years called Spot the Propaganda, where I look at just a website or a newspaper's headline, the beginning of the article, and then the picture that they choose. Probably the most popular installment that I did was one that was calling Joe Rogan something like controversial far right uh, podcaster, Joe Rogan, right? And it throws all of these adjectives before mentioning the person. So they're like little cute. You're supposed to think he's controversial. Okay, so that means he's unpopular. A lot of people don't like him for good reason. Oh, because he's far right. Oh yeah. He's extreme. He's way out there. Oh, and then the picture is of him. It's sort of like the photo looks almost artificially darkened, and he's wearing black, and it's like he's glancing down at the camera, and he looks like he's suspicious, like his eyes are darting around with the angle of his face. Like, oh, he looks guilty. He looks bad because he's wearing black, and it's dark, and it's creepy. And so the real story is all of these techniques that are being used before you even read anything about what it was that Joe had to say. And that, of course, is the manipulation. And now our friend James David Dixon from the Enjoyer podcast, also the Michigan Enjoyer website blog, he asks, why is journalism anti-persuasive? Now, you and I see this sort of, we propaganda spot, okay? We see this stuff and it makes us roll our eyes. I think rather than being anti-persuasive, journalism nowadays is persuasive to people who are already persuaded, and it entrenches them further in that tribal viewpoint. But it doesn't persuade the other side at all. It's more anti-persuasive. And so it's both attracting and it's repelling at the same time. I think that's
Mm.
really what modern journalism has become. What do you think, Doc?
I think that I engage often in what you're talking about. I like to pull headlines and then post them on X and say, let's break down the absolutely intentionally, I'm using a lot of bad verbs there, I'm sorry, but the engineered persuasion that is by design in these headlines. And I pointed out that if you go to MSNBC in particular, they're not even trying to hide those types of words. It is the far right, horrible, evil. They just put it right out there, which is good for the bottom line. It takes advantage of our brain's confirmation bias, and people want to feel like they're right, so they will read articles that make them feel like they're very right. But if you go to something like the New York Times, they're a lot more subtle about it. They don't come right out and hit you over the head with the crazy, language that you're talking about. They'll cue up a headline such as, let's see, why all the experts agree that the COVID vaccine is safe. Well, there's no loaded emotional words other than maybe safe, I guess. But what they've just done is they've talked you past the sale. They've said it is safe. Here's why the experts agree that it is. And that's a very subtle, persuasive move to stop you from even thinking, is it safe? Well, yeah, it is. We're just telling you why experts agree on that. And so from that standpoint, there are some of those middle of the road, your NPRs, I think, to some extent trying to stay centrist a little bit and be a little more appealing across the board, but they're still using some high-powered persuasion techniques. And I think you and I both know, I'm not necessarily sure that they have people on staff that have studied hypnosis per se, but they have done a lot of algorithm-based A/B testing to find out, what headlines get the most clicks, the most engagement, and that kind of thing. So there is a sense in which they are quote unquote trained to engineer for maximum persuadability.
Well, they also have to know their audience, and they have to perpetually engage in what we'll call now tribal reframing. I've
Mm.
noticed NPR do this specifically. Imagine that there's a terrible story for Democrats. They will then engage, because the vast majority of NPR, not just listeners and readers, but financial supporters and donors, are left wing. They then have to go, what is the tribal reframe of this that makes Donald Trump look bad and Democrats good and righteous? You could pick any story, any story. Look, okay, the absolute botching of the LA wildfire relief and rebuilding situation under Democratic Mayor Karen Bass. Okay, so a tribal reframing of that story would be something like the white supremacist roots of lack of fire protection in LA or something like that, which is like, what? And then they talk
Yes.
about how the redlining of these various districts of Los Angeles resulted in it being more than such and such number of minutes from this area of the fire department to this area where all of the homes were built, and blah, 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 blah. Something like that. Now, I'm completely making it up, but that's an
Right.
example of tribal reframing where you say this has to be good for us. What are all the possible ways that this can be good at us? And I think that they're engaging in these techniques without even thinking about, like, consciously realizing that they're engaging in this because they have to reframe for their tribe. And if there's a story that cannot be tribally reframed, they don't even talk about it. Like the Hunter
Right.
Biden laptop scenario. They said, well, you're just not allowed to talk about it because it was not very easy to tribally reframe that one for normies. And so platforms like Twitter just banned the New York Post from reporting on it. And NPR said, we're not talking about it. And then, of course, they tribally reframed that by trotting out the 50 current and former intelligence community members say it's Russian disinformation or looks like it. And they would say it looks like Russian disinformation. They would kind of sneak that one in there and past you.
Right.
Oh, okay, then it must be. If it looks like it, it must be. If it looks like a duck and talks like a duck, it must be. Smoking a gun. Okay, it looks like it, so it is. That was the tribal reframing of that story, which is effectively censorship. So even a story that could not be tribally reframed the story of that not being tribally reframed and being censored was tribally reframed. And it's really funny to do and engage in this as a sort of a thought experiment or exercise. Something horrible could happen that Democrats do, and it will be tribally reframed. And of course, we saw that with the attempted assassination of the president last year, twice. It wasn't candidate Donald Trump survives assassination attempt. It was Trump stumbles on stage, questions about health being asked. Is Biden younger and having more energy? Something like that. Like that was the horrific tribal reframe. And everyone in the mainstream media did it. You might remember that, Doc.
I do remember all those silly headlines, and we've seen collages of that. Trump falls on stage, loud popping noises heard. Those kinds of things. Like, wow, this is some crazy. I like that you keep using the word tribal, because I'm reminded of, I don't know if you know of Chase Hughes. He's another great behavioral engineer, hypnotist, worked with the CIA, that kind of thing. He talks about the four signs, the four pillars of a psyop, and it's the acronym is FATE, F-A-T-E. It's focus, authority, tribe, and emotion. And so this kind of links back to what we were saying earlier about being manipulation proof and understanding that, hey, look, the brain mostly operates from the emotionally driven mammalian brain, control center. Tribe is a big way to drive that emotion. You don't want to be apart from your tribe, do you? That's where you feel safe, and the allegiance and the loyalty, which is a huge emotional play. And so they do. They try to make it a tribal thing. It's an othering, right? Us versus them. The other side is doing this, and this is bad for us. So it's very manipulative. But yes, they slip in those little funny phrases, little words that you're like, that just slipped right past. That went right to the subconscious, went right past it. There was, I think it was during the One Big Beautiful Bill when that was being passed in the House. It had gone to the Senate, and Marjorie Taylor Greene had come out and said, whoops, I missed a sentence or a paragraph in here that had to do with AI. And she was like, if I had caught that, I would never have left that in. And she was publicly admitting it. And then I think maybe one other representative said something similar, like, oh, I missed something in there and I want to revise it. The Times ran a headline that said Marjorie Taylor Greene joins growing list of Republicans who are opposed to the bill as it stands. And I thought, wow, technically that's true. It's a growing list. It has precisely 2 people on it, both of whom said they were quite happy with the bill, for the most part, maybe 1 or 2 sentences. But that is a heck of a way to frame and say, it's a growing list. It makes you think, what, 20, 30? Like, how big is this going to get? Right past the old conscious brain.
Yes, and these sorts of techniques are done on purpose. Is that tribal reframing again? What is the absolute best way for our tribe to put this, and the absolute worst way for their tribe? And then outlets like the New York Times and NPR will think plausible deniability. How can we say this in such a way that it's technically true? It's technically true. And that's an example, a growing list. Well, it grew from 1 people to 2 people. Is that technically a growing list? Yes. But they know people are going to think, oh, it must be 50. Oh, it must be hundreds. Oh, it must be the entire House of Representatives as anti-Trump, which is what people sort of take away emotionally. So that's sort of the canon or the lore that's taken away by their people is, wow, look at all the Republicans turning on Trump. So that when they go back to their pro-Trump or Republican friends, family members, colleagues, coworkers, their new talking point is, oh yeah, I heard NPR today, they're all turning on Trump over One Big Beautiful Bill. That's what they say because that's what they believe from the growing list opposing the bill. But the growing list it went from 1 to 2 people, and both of them voted for it anyway. So it's a completely made up, let's say, narrative, or as I say, lore or canon that is sort of emotionally true. And this is what I believe the right needs to come to understand, is that there are things that are emotionally true that may not be literally 100% true in all cases or even generally true, but they're true enough. Scott Adams, of course, calls this directional accuracy or being directionally accurate. And even if it's not directionally accurate, I think the emotional truth thing is important, which is why the Springfield story was so popular last September, particularly giving otherwise an underperformance during the debate against Kamala Harris by Donald J. Trump, and it be a victorious debate for him. So much so that he didn't need the debate column again, despite her demands. Please, 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 give me another chance. I did so, with the implication being, I did so poorly on the last one. I need another chance. Please, please fight me. You see. But of course, the famous line, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the pets of the people that live there, referring to Springfield, Ohio, which is down the street from me. I'm its neighbor over in Dayton. And the emotional truth is that Haitian culture is not compatible with Springfield, Ohio. That's the emotional truth that was conveyed by they're eating the cats or eating the dogs of the people that live there. So nitpick all you want of that story. Okay, well, they're stealing and eating geese from the park. And what was the left-wing spin on that, Doc? What was their tribal reframe? Oh, so you've never eaten birds?
Uh-huh.
Fried
Yeah.
chicken for lunch? You hypocrite. Don't be a racist. Eating geese is part of their
It's
culture. We have plenty of geese in the park. I don't even care about the geese. In fact, I'll feed them and fatten them up for the Haitians. They can't get food. They need food stamps. They need support. They need us. They're our greatest strength. Every one tribal
it's
reframe after another.
yes, yes. And what's funny about that specific example is, you know as well as I do, Donald J. Trump is one of the master reframers, persuaders, if not outright hypnotists. That you'll see he uses a lot of the same techniques, repetition, and a lot of the leading questions, like "This is great, isn't it?" He'll say that all the time. Um, that debate took place when my wife and I were off on vacation. And when I'm on vacation, I'm very much off the grid. So I'm not on X, I'm not even watching the news. But it was the night of the debate, and we were happily in Boston watching the Red Sox play the Orioles at Fenway Park. And by the time we got back to the hotel, much, much later, I didn't check my X feed until the next morning. Wonder how the debate went. You can usually get a feel from scrolling through X news feeds. When I tell you, the only thing that I was seeing in the X feeds was memes of the cats, Donald Trump running through the park with geese in his arms to save them. I'm like, what happened last night? Well, guess what? That was the only thing that made the headlines. It may have been, oh, it's not technically accurate. They're not actually killing dogs. Well, guess what? That's what everybody was talking about. And that is how Scott Adams talks about Trump being an energy monster. He creates the energy and moves it where he wants it. And so suddenly that's the one thing everyone's talking about is, even if you're trying to debunk whether the pets are actually being eaten, guess what you're thinking about? The problems of illegal immigration. It's maybe in a different frame now, and you can debunk the specifics of that frame, but you're still talking about the subject that he wants you talking about.
And I think it was J.D. Vance who, in several interviews, he had an incredible tribal reframe the accusation that this was made up. And his tribal reframe was something like, in 2025, we shouldn't be having to even ask how many of our pets are being eaten by migrants. Our immigration policy is so bad that we're having to take that seriously. We're having to send investigative journalists and independent reporters into neighborhoods where nobody speaks the language, and that and there's no one anywhere who speaks Haitian Creole. And there's risk
Mm.
of people being hit by vehicles that are driven by Haitians because they don't have driver's license, because they don't speak English, they don't understand the road signs or road laws. They're very different in Haiti. Oh, and by the way, they have no interest in learning English. Oh, and by the way, they're getting paid less than half the wages by these companies who are hiring them. Oh, and by the way, they're living 10 to 1 in houses that are being rented out to them using federal dollars. And just one after the next, on this. That J.D. Vance is a fantastic right-wing tribal reframer, because he can speak to the emotional truth, but also to something that is closer to an objective truth, which is, we should not be asking how many pets are being kidnapped, pet napped, and dog napped, and being eaten, being carved up and barbecued by Haitians. We should not even be wondering how many that number is. The fact we're
Oh, that's
having to
good.
ask it, it tells us everything is wrong with immigration. And that's how you win. That's how you win.
And you probably didn't even notice what you just said, but it's a perfect example of how Trump deploy what Scott Adams calls strong visual persuasion. You just said just now, being carved up and eaten. Like that creates a very visceral.
Barbecue. I said barbecue as
Yeah,
well. Yes.
Yes, you did. Carved up on the barbecue. Like now I can't help but visualize poor Fluffy being carved up. That's such a great, visual word. And so what are we saying again? It's like if you push the buttons in the emotional control center of the brain, you can shift the feelings, the opinions, and now we're talking about a whole other realm of, hey, yeah, are they actually being carved up on a barbecue? I don't know. Why are we having this conversation? Ah, okay. So now we are having this conversation. Well done.
Yes, exactly. And one other thing I want to add, Doc, is right a few days after that debate in Springfield, Ohio, Vivek Ramaswamy, together with Tiffany Justice from Moms for Liberty at the time, they had a joint town hall where the state senator, I think it was a state senator, state representative, Phil Plummer of the district, the three of them all spoke at this event. It was standing room only. I mean, there was a line of hundreds of people waiting outside. They had to like turn people away. It was crazy, and a bunch of various mainstream political news outlets and reporters and journalists were there. And there's this little tiny horn rim glassed, wiry little man, maybe 4'10", from Politico. Definitely an LGBT coded individual. I assume he was a he. But he, in interviewing multiple individuals who were there, myself included, I recall him saying, this is very distinctly, he was interviewing me, by the way, and he asked me a question, but not as a question. So he doesn't ask, and this is something else about journalists I've noticed. It wasn't a very productive conversation, but it didn't really go anywhere. I had one of my kids with me at the time. I was just like, I don't want to get into a street fight with one of my children here. This is just a bad situation of waiting
Right.
to happen. So I didn't play the game he's wanting to play. But he asked this question, and then he puts the mic in my face. And so he goes with his kind of squinting through his fogged up glasses with his snout turned up at me. He said, and I probably won't ever forget this because it's a perfect example of everything wrong, or as James David Dixon would say, everything anti-persuasive about journalists. The rumors and the racist lies about our Haitian immigrant neighbors, it's all been debunked. It's all been debunked. And he pushed the mic in my face. Did you hear a question, Doc?
No, not there.
There's no question because that's the point. They are so good at the tribal reframes that it's like second nature. It's like, I'm not using any manipulation techniques. I'm a fish. What's water? I'm an air breathing mammal. What's air? No idea what that is. And that
Mm,
was fascinating because he used the passive voice. It's been debunked. By whom is not even asked. And this,
right.
by the way, was the message that was echoed across all major outlets. Did they send anyone into the Haitian neighborhood? Did any mainstream media organization send any reporter into the Haitian neighborhoods to find this out? No. None of them did. Not a single one. It all came from reports from various Haitian community leaders where they would completely and totally and, notice the bad verbs, permanently and colloquially and forevermore deny that any pets are being consumed. Well, we heard it from them. The Haitian community leader, well, they said it's not happening, so we're done here. Pack it up and go home. I saw the live stream. You saw the live stream.
Yeah, that's an example again of the talking past the sale, right? Like, what's been debunked? How do you feel about it having already been debunked?
Yes.
Wait, hold up, back up. And then you also just mentioned there what I was saying, the four pillars of PSYOP: focus, authority, 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 authority. They will always do this, right? Oh, the experts have said. We've talked to the leaders and they've said. And so how do you feel about the leaders having already debunked? Like, this is a combination of techniques to get you to just shut off the critical thinking. And again, if you can wrap that in a little bit of tribalism along the way, I mean, it just becomes a real, one, two, three punch that is. This is why I say, if you understand what's going on under the hood in the brain with the emotional triggers, the tribalism, the authority, the shortcuts that we take, the fastest way out of that, I always say, is to ask the question, what emotion am I feeling right now as I'm hearing this news report? What emotion am I feeling as I'm reading this headline? And why? Why am I being asked to feel joyful or angry or fearful or whatever it might be? To be aware of the emotional buttons that are being pushed and say, hold up, hold up, hold up, come on. And unfortunately, this works on both sides of our fence. There was a post some months ago that I like to now use as my illustration of how this works on the right. That somebody had posted. It was right after Trump took office, and said the some Russian tribunal wanted to extradite rather, Dr. Fauci to face a court basically for crimes against humanity, and that Trump is considering doing this. And of course I'm reading this like, okay, as Scott Adams says, that's way too on the nose, and there's no sources cited. But this post got shared tens of thousands of times, and most of the comments were like, good, it's about time. Oh, he should be brought to justice. Like, wow, it just bypasses, because it's tribal, because it pushes the right emotion, and you just disconnect the cognitive function of your brain there and stop thinking whether it's actually true. And we'll share this all over the internet. So, you have to kind of watch it from both sides.
You do, yes. That's why I appreciate people like Scott Adams, because he, together with Mike Cernovich, I think, are unique voices in that most of the time you don't know what their opinion is going to be about something.
Mm-hmm.
It's not usually the obvious, and it's not the opposite of the obvious. It's something that has so much nuance. It's like a third way or a middle way. Sometimes it's the third rail. In the case of Scott Adams and some of his views on things, and then of course there's false memories that people have about this, that, or the other. But the point is that lends itself to building an audience. I don't know what this person's going to say. At the same time, though, tribal reframing will always have commercial viability, because people generally, you might remember the one sentence persuasion course from Blair Warren.
Yeah.
One of the things in there is that people want to have their suspicions confirmed and their fears allayed. And if you can perpetually tell people everything you thought was right is, and the experts agree with you, and look at what's happening in the news, everything's fine and you were right all along. And if it's not fine, well, it's going to be because you were right all along. And that's what you tell your people with a little bit more sophistication than that. Whether you're a conservative Daily Wire subscriber or a Ben Shapiro stan, or you're over there with the Rachel Maddow Americans, or you like the boomer memes on Facebook for the weekend warrior flower power protesters from the 60s who go out because Elon Musk's become a tyrant or something like that. You just tell the people what they want to hear, and you'll always have an audience. It's the people who have nuance who get in trouble, it seems like.
All the time, all the time. Well, and the other funny thing about it is we're kind of coming back to this theme of tribalism. That it feels good to be a part of a group in that respect. Uh, you see it especially during the election cycles, but even currently, right now, polls are a huge persuasion tool. Polls they leverage that social proof principle that Robert Cialdini talks about. It hits on that tribalism button to say, oh look, 65% of not only Americans, Joshua, but male Americans, Joshua, male Americans of a particular age that you happen to fit in that specific demographic, like they'll go boom, 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 and make it so connected to you as an individual. And it's like, guess what? You're in the majority. How does that make you feel? You're part of a 65% majority that feels this way or that way. So, you can see that throughout the election cycles, especially when they're like, oh, look, Kamala has a lead among XYZ specific demographic breakdown. I say they probably don't, but what they're doing is they're appealing to that demographic, people in that demographic, to say, oh, then I should vote that way too. It's persuasion, it's not information.
Yes, all polls are marketing, it turns out. And one
Hmm.
example of this, I think, was how Jack Posobiec was reporting via his various sources that within the Kamala campaign, there was a lot of chimping out and a lot of drinking out, because the polls that they were running that were actually accurate showed her significantly behind from the very beginning. And as far as I recall, there was never a point in which she was even close to being tied to Donald Trump in polling from the accurate internal polls. But the polls that they were perpetually reporting were the ones that were marketing, that showed her, oh, she's gaining ground in these states, and Wisconsin's going to be competitive, and Trump's going to lose Florida, these sorts of things. And then you had left-wing political commentators who were amplifying those storylines with things like Kamala's path to win every swing state. So if you're in one of the swing states, that's an attempt to appeal to you like, oh, wow, she has a chance here. I should go vote for her.
Yeah, big
Now, the
time.
word we come back to, Doc, is consent. Do we consent to being manipulated? and persuaded in this way. And I think in terms of a call to action from this episode, that I think is really it. Do you give your consent to be hypnotized?
Mm.
If not, maybe don't go to that evangelical faith healing church service. Maybe
Right.
don't listen to that particular news source. Maybe don't doom scroll X, for example. What do you think, Doc?
I think you just gave me the perfect opening to mention the one thing that I wanted to mention that I've been pushing very heavily for a couple of months now, maybe. It's something that I want our side, there's my tribal appeal, the MAGA right especially, to stop using the word transgender. That is a hypnotic word. It uses the hypnotic technique of repetition. And if you look at the breakdown of the words trans, meaning to change, to transition, etc., and then gender, put those two together, you're admitting implicitly every time you say it that gender can be changed. And so I like to point out that the word we used to use was transvestite.
Yes.
Vestite comes from the Latin vestare, which means your clothes. That is reality. That's what they used to call it because that's what's happening. A man changes his clothes, puts on a woman's dress. He is a transvestite. He is not a transgender. He is not a trans woman. And when we consent to keep using that terminology and repeating it and repeating it and repeating it, we are actually slowly rewiring our own brains to accept that that's reality, that gender can be transed. And so if there's any, sort of takeaway from my appeal to the audience to get with our tribe here is insist that it's transvestite. And you'll see if you start using that word in public, the left hates that word more than any other word you could come up with. Why do they hate that word so much? Because
Because it calls bull on them. It calls bull.
it describes actual reality, and they're trying to change and distort reality. So they hate being taken back to the actual, no, this is what it is. You're a transvestite. So don't consent.
100%. And generally, the left wins culture wars with words. It's
Mm-hmm.
a culture war is a war of words where instead of so the word we used to use was sodomy
Mm, yep.
for millennia, in whatever language you spoke. Then it became marriage equality, and you feel completely different about it when you go from sodomy to marriage equality. When you go from something like infanticide to women's reproductive health and freedom. When you go from transvestite to even transgender, which has the same prefix word, I guess, of trans in there. If they can win the war of words, they hypnotize you or they entrance you, or in the population way, entrain everyone into accepting trans women are women, trans women are women. And then, of course, they will chant these sorts of things at protests, which are another way and means of entrainment. You know, Doc, there was one of the comments that said, it would be interesting to see if you guys disagreed on anything and then hash it out. And I wonder, I don't know if there's anything we disagree on, because we're both, I would refer to both of us, ironically, as NPRs, which are Nationalist Populist Republicans, which
Okay.
is, to put it simply, we are a nation of people. Our republic has responsibility to help protect, provide, and prosper. That is what a
Mm-hmm.
nationalist populist Republican is. That's the new right, or MAGA plus MAHA, that sort of alliance there. I don't know if there's anything we do disagree on, since we have those first principles in common.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to get hypnotists to disagree because of the way we view the moldable, I guess, malleable nature of small r reality. That we're, as Scott Adams has said, our brains are delusion generating machines. I am manipulatable all the time. That's how I avoid it. But I'm also very aware of the things that I get emotionally attached to. That, like, okay, yeah, I'm generating a delusion. It's probably a good one. It's not always bad, and it's useful, but it's definitely a delusion. And so I think when you have that sort of view on things and realize how easy it is to kind of shift your own emotions and feelings and thoughts and behaviors and actions, it's hard to like meet another hypnotist and say, well, you're wrong about
Yeah.
this collision of reality. There may be things that you post once in a while that I look at, I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. But then I'm also looking at it going, yeah, but Joshua is also a hypnotist, so I'm never sure if you're being serious or if you're moving the energy on purpose. And so I guess when you read the world that way, like I do, it's hard to go, oh, we disagree on things.
Yes, it is hard to disagree with good technique when you're witnessing it, because I don't literally agree with that, but I understand that hypothetically he's shifting the Overton window to include
Hmm.
opinions like that. So when you
Yep.
take this radical opinion and you average it with what most people believe, you have a new baseline established of what's acceptable opinions.
Right. Yeah, that's a
And I
good
will
point.
admit I am regularly doing that. Yes.
Oh, all the time. All the time. It's the same with Scott Adams and the stuff that I post too. I will lean out a little bit and go a little bit further than some people might be comfortable with, but I'm going, look, I'm illustrating a point. As Rush Limbaugh used to say, demonstrating absurdity by being absurd. You do some of these entertainment games, if you will, to shift that window to get people thinking differently.
Yes, and that's what we're here for. I think the embrace of some of these tools openly by right wing influencers is going to be a big deal, as long as we're able to show and demonstrate that they work and call out what the president, for example, is doing. I think Win Bigly, Scott writing that and publishing it in 2017, 2018 was wildly valuable to the right, because it sort of codified that Trump wasn't a clown genius, so to speak, which of course was Scott Adams' 2015 descriptor of him, but he was in fact a persuasion strategist at work here, which was, clown genius was better than just clown. It is sort
Mm.
of, speaking of an Overton window shift, eventually, okay, this is a master persuader at work, but let's start with something that's a little bit more manageable for most people to get their heads around, which was, he's not a clown, he's a clown genius. And then eventually over the decade, it took people to realize, okay, this is probably the most persuasive man alive in the world
Uh,
right now.
that's what I call linguistic stapling, where you take clown and genius, put them together because clown gets you in the door
Yes.
with people that agree with that particular word, but then you have to take the word genius with it, and eventually through repetition, guess what?
Yeah, I had a conversation with someone who is a donor on the right. I will stop there and some specifics, because the conversation, what's important. This particular individual, the conversation with him went to, why are so many liberal women living in a reality-free zone? And by that, I mean everything they believe about the world around them is wrong, to the extent that the opposite of what they believe and feel is objectively true from everyone else's perspective around them. And a good example of this was caught on video over in Dublin, Ireland. I believe it was yesterday. Police officers are being attacked by an Arab individual or Arab presenting individual with a knife. He's literally stabbing them. And one of these female Irish liberals is screaming at the cops to be nice and gentle and kind with this man who's literally trying to stab them. So it's not possible to get more reality free, I think, than that, although maybe it is. But why are so many women liberal, particularly single and otherwise childless women, which is half of millennials, right? Which is sort of the 30s, 40s bracket right now. And this linguistic stabling, instead of asking why are they that way, let's ask what a hypnotist does, which is, well, what do we want? Well, what we want is for them to not be anti-life as they are in many ways. So how do we do that? Well, linguistic stabling. What can we agree with that isn't important enough to them, and then add a little something. That's just like the next thing. It's like domino persuasion, where the one falls over
Mm.
and then eventually you get where you want to go. Okay, so the first domino is equality and freedom and diversity and everyone just be nice and happy. It's sort of like parenting a toddler type of mindset. That is where they are maturation-wise and how they look at the world. And when they see migrants who are criminals, they think, oh, you poor baby. And they see in them as like their metaphorical mommy over these people, right? And the more violent they are, the more love they need. That's how they think in that way. So, okay, we want them to be over here thinking, stay on track, they all go back. Right here, they see a brown criminal and think, that's my baby. Okay, what's the next domino over from that? What's the linguistic stabling it's going to take in this clown genius metaphor? Do you have any thoughts on that, Doc, or do we open just a can of worms here? We can't close today.
Oh my goodness. And things like that especially, I feel like Some people are really good at just like off the top of their head, tip of the tongue, like, oh, here's a perfect, phrase. I like to craft it a little bit. I like to, in fact, in this book, the exercises that I give, I'll say like, start with a sentence of something you want somebody to do, and then rewrite it like 8 different times, but changing, inserting little embedded commands into it and working through it. Take your time with it, craft it well. Um, One way that we can accomplish this, though, is honestly, you mentioned the sticky phrase that you keep using, stay on track, they all go back. You can, in a sense, bypass the whole domino effect simply by creating a sticky phrase like that. It rhymes, and it's short, and it's memorable, and there is some value to what I call the hypnotic disruption. So if somebody is in my face and just screaming, we're arguing over politics or whatever it is, and I'll just say, how do you think the Tigers are going to do this year? A Lions going to the Super Bowl? They go, what? Sorry, what were we talking about? Well, I've just disrupted your entire, train of thought. So if it's, tell that cop to be okay, I say, ma'am, stay on track. They all go back. What? Just stay on track. They all go back. What does that mean? Oh, it doesn't matter because I just disrupted your current train of insanity, and now I've reinserted a moment of suggestibility with a nice little rhyming, alliterative, type of phrase. But I
That's
will
a good
work on
one.
the
Is
problem.
yes, the
I'll work on the
interruption
problem.
of the interruption of their frenzied uh, state of hysteria, to use that little word that they hate so much.
Any oddity like that, Darren Brown tells the story of how he was almost mugged one night, and decided he had to confront the attacker because he couldn't run, he couldn't fight. So he just turned around and said to the guy, "The walls outside my house are not that tall." And it was just so out of left field and odd. This would-be attacker, was so high up on adrenaline and what he was about to do that this absurdity, this disruption of reality, the guy ended up just like sitting down and collapsing and just sobbing because it was such an effective disruption. Not that I would ever recommend anyone try that in real life. But when you're talking about, these frenzies that happen, whether it's in a protest or even in an online screed, you can completely throw off the rhythm with an out of left field absurdity, whether it's a slogan like that or just a simple, you know, gosh, what do you think about how, I don't know, the price of Starbucks these days? What? Doesn't matter. Let's go back to what we were trying to discuss, but now it's reframed
And
because
this
I've
is where
stopped you. Yep.
multiple of our techniques all converge, and then we have a demonstration of that. So this saying something to someone that they're not expecting to hear whatsoever, the shifting of an Overton window to new understandings of reality that might be not cool, particularly to baby boomer age Republican voters, kind of like I call them Fox News Americans. Oh, wait, that's the technique. You know how we have this issue of like there's Americans and then there's the hyphen Americans,
Mm-hmm.
African dash Americans, Asian dash Americans. I am attacking that as hard as I can because if we are not one America, we are hosed. We are become a fractured, balkanized state where we import the third world and we become the third world and have third world problems. And we end up where like Minnesota is like little Somalia, for example. And a way to call this out that, you know how boomers will like to say, I don't see race. Race sees you. And we are in this hyper tribal world now, and the vast majority of Americans aren't realizing it. And I fear that we might when it's too late to avoid significant violence and discomfort, among other things, because we've not been able to talk about this for so long. So, this
Mm.
mob of 100 people who first goaded on and then assaulted these three white individuals, what color were they? What color were these people? So what am I calling them, Doc? When I talk about the story. I talk about the story. I call them Cincinnati Americans,
Oh, nice,
for example.
nice.
And you remember, so I don't say black people. I say Cincinnati Americans because then you remind, the story, the 100 people, the mob. They first accused these three people of using a particular slur, which they didn't. The mob begins to surround them and taunting them. The three try to fight back and get out, and that's when the all-on carnage begins at that point. That's the Cincinnati American way. And I also say this like with NPR Americans. It's a diminutive that puts people in a little box where we can laugh at them a little bit
Mm.
because realize, they're people who believe whatever NPR says and regurgitate it. They make it their identity, you see. So I am able to shift the Overton window to talk about the fact that tribe and race are real to such an extent that they decide our realities. And we have tribal conflicts, we have ethnic conflicts in the United States because we haven't been able to assimilate for a number of decades successfully. And that's not going to work. Stay on track, they all go back.
Yeah. Yeah, what you just said is so true. You're using a labeling technique that, in effect, creates its own mini tribe, and then invites you to evaluate that as a tribe. Let's not talk about the specific NPR headline or what's right or wrong about it. Let's just say that's an NPR American view. And somehow people can, this is very hypnotic too, we're ambiguous enough here that we're letting the person fill in the blanks. What's that mean? What's NPR American? Well, you know, because you're filling it in right now as we're saying it. You're envisioning something, and now you're doing the work for me. I don't have to spell it out linguistically. I just gave you a label. You're filling in the box, and oh, by the way, you're now invested in the box because you filled it in, and now you believe it. So it's a very clever thing that that I've seen you doing with Facebook American, NPR American. You could extend that, Reddit Americans. How about HR Americans? You could just kind of go nuts with that.
Yes. Well, Doc, I have to interrupt us now. I'm at the end of my available time today. We did go a little over for what I first promised we would talk. I thank you for participating so long with me. Do you have any last call to actions besides using transvestite, using the word transvestite,
That's
not
right.
transgender? Anything else? We can follow you at BowTiedTrance, of course, on X.
Yeah, at BowTiedTrance on X. I did a very poor job of branding myself initially because I've got the local site, which goes under hypnohacking.locals.com. Why that's not just BowTiedTrance, I don't know. I set that one up first. Doesn't matter. But if you go to my X profile, there is a Linktree link that's got the Gumroad audio track products, the link to the local site, the link to book a session with me, the link to buy the book, all that fun stuff. Thank you so much, Joshua. This has been a pleasure. It's always a good sign to me when initially you said, we'll go till about whatever the time you said. And I looked at my phone a few minutes ago and went, how is it already that time? It feels like we've been talking for 20 minutes. So
Yes.
always a good sign of a good conversation. So thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. And I look forward to having another conversation with you soon.
My pleasure. Take care.